Alright guys, welcome back to Witch in the Holy Night. We are now beginning chapter 11 of this game, and currently we now have Aoko, who's now in trouble. So now we're going to find out about what's going to happen next. So if anything else, hope you all continue to enjoy. Thank you all for the love and support. Let's do this. Alright everyone, welcome back. We're about to start on the next chapter, Witch on the Holy Night Part 1. Aoko had not hung up, but the line remained silent. Alice set down the receiver, quickly put on her mantle, and made for the entrance, moving her injured body by sheer willpower alone. Along the way, she paused and turned to Sojiro, and looked directly at him.
青子に何かあったんだな。
Alice hesitated for a moment, before pushing aside her anxiety and grabbing his hand.
しずきくん、一緒に来て。
待ってくれ。一緒にってどこに？
相田教会まで。青子の方は営利神父にお願いするしかないから。
相田教会って病院の横にある？
そう。知っているのなら問題ないわね。説明する手間も省けたわ。
Alice left the mansion and made her way down the tree-lined path. She was clearly determined, but the look in her eyes betrayed her pain.
アリス、連絡をするなら電話は？
Sojiro asked Alice, whose grip on his hand was light but unyielding.
教会の人にならもう知らせた。もしかして病院のことを言っているなら、それこそ無駄よ。ハイヤーなんて言うけど、空を飛ぶわけでもないし。今は助けを呼ぶより、助けに行かないと間に合わない。
Alice had thought of everything. She turned to the mansion and lightly snapped her fingers. In response, a window opened and countless starlings took flight.
1番隊は索敵。2番隊と3番隊は現場に向かって応急処置を。在庫切れになってもいいわ。まだ生きているなら、青子の心臓を止めないで。
Alice commanded the birds firmly.
しずきくんは裏庭から青子の自転車を持ってきて。
Sojiro let slip his discomfort at the thought of that thing. The custom-made red bicycle. When he was cleaning the incinerator, Aoko had verbally assaulted him for nearly scratching it.
いいけど、どうするつもりなんだ、アリスは。
ここにいるより、教会にいた方がしずきくんは安全よ。それに、私も急がないといけない。しずきくん、二人乗りできる？
He had seen others ride tandem and was confident he could do it. Only it was the bicycle that concerned him. Its frame was so light, Sojiro was unsure it could support both their weights.
ん？二人乗りってことは、アリスが後ろに乗るのか？
できないなら、いいわ。
Alice turned away as if to snub him, then began walking. Unfortunately for Sojiro, he was now on her bad side.
いや、そういう意味じゃないんだ。アリスとはイメージが合わなかったから。
Ignoring his pleas, he continued briskly towards the woods. There was no way she was going to ride the bike now. Sensing her stubborn streak, he desperately called out to her.
待った。今のはこっちが悪かった。すぐに持ってくるから、怒るのはつけにしておいてくれ。
Alice stopped. As soon as he saw her stop, he hurried to the rear courtyard, grabbed the key from where it was hanging, and used it to unlock Aoko's bicycle. By the time Sojiro brought it back to the front of the mansion, Alice was continuing toward the forest.
アリスの性格、なんとなくつかめてきたな。
Muttering to himself, he straddled the bike. He rested his foot on the pedal. It felt light but sturdy. Confident the bike could support his weight on Alice's, he began pedaling.
アリス、
She turned as he called out to her, before shooting him a piercing glare.
行こう。後ろの荷台に乗ってくれ。でもクッションがないから痛いと思う。辛かったら言ってくれ。止めるから。
私は大丈夫よ。しずきくんが嫌じゃなければの話だけど。
He had hit the nail on the head. Alice definitely held a grudge over the smallest things.
そういうことなら問題ないよ。アリスが後ろにいてくれるのは嬉しい。それで、行き先は間境界でいいんだな。
Unabashed and undaunted, he plowed on. His tone seemed to ease Alice's mood. She nodded calmly and took a seat on the luggage rack above the rear tire.
手を回すけど、私が触れても平気。
ん？大丈夫だよ。体力があるのはさっき証明しただろ。
Alice silently wrapped her arms around Sojiro. Once she had held on tightly enough, he gripped the handlebars.
よかった。
He said quietly.
何が良かったの？
Sojiro turned to her, an ambiguous expression on his face, and then began pedaling vigorously. He let go of the brakes and the bicycle hurled down Shironizuka's steep incline. Surprised by the sudden speed, Alice gasped and clutched Sojiro tighter. She went to protest, but stopped when she saw the serious expression on Sojiro's face. Instead, she decided to tighten her grip. Under the night sky, a young girl had put her faith in a young boy. Faster than a roller coaster, the bicycle hurled toward Misaki Town Station. Around the station, there was no sight of cars or people. While the town slept under its snowy blanket, two people were racing like the wind. The boy spoke.
本当によかった。二人乗りが思ったより簡単で。
But he was alone in his relief. It was their first bicycle ride together, and they spent it speeding down an empty highway. The boy's words were lost to the howling wind, unfortunately. In spite of the late hour, there were still lights on in the church. Originally, the light at this time of night came from the entrance to the sleepless hospital, ever vigilant and ready to receive patients. However, this was a quiet town with little nightlife. The hospital saw perhaps one emergency patient per night, however, and it was not equipped to handle tonight's sole patient. It was little before 1 o'clock in the morning. Leaving the bicycle outside, the two headed into the church. With its snow-covered roof, the church looked like it was wearing a white hat that lit up the darkness. In the entrance stood a tall shadow.
クオンジさん。
The man's voice was placid. Dressed in a long coat, he had been waiting for Alice.
エイリ神父、青子は？
ユイカが見ています。私が駆けつけた時には手遅れでした。青崎の家に伝令を願いたいのですが。
青子はそれを望まないわ。それに、あちらも今は城に囚われているそうです。今夜の相手は、真っ先に青子の祖父の動きを封じたようですから。
The two exchanged pleasantries. Sojiro did not move from the foot of the stairs.
おや、そちらは。
Though the father seemed calm, his words had an edge to them. As if to protect Sojiro from his gaze, Alice stepped between them.
彼は青子の使い魔。契約はまだなされていないけれど。
使い魔ってアリス。
Sojiro was about to complain, but Alice shot him a fiery glare. That all but said, just shut up and play along.
そうですか。そのような申告はありませんでしたが、届けが遅れたのは不問としましょう。外部の魔術師と交戦中でしたからね。 あなたたちはその撃退を最優先にしたということで。
Alice nodded in thanks.
では通ります。彼の同行を許可しなさい。
ご自由に。私はこれより朝廷に向かいます。管理者が変わるのなら、両教会への資料を用意しなければいけませんので。ああ、留守中は律香に任せてありますから、必要なものがあれば彼女に。
This guy looks just as devious as Kotomine. As if passing the baton, Father 80 exited the church. Sojiro took 2 full steps back to give him a wide berth. The priest had a dignified air about him. To put it bluntly, he was strikingly beautiful. Straight nose, glistening lips, not a single imperfection on his mildly effeminate face. But that only went as far as his appearance. His manner lacked any hint of softness or grace. Just by looking at him, you could tell he was dependable, like tempered steel, despite being somewhat unapproachable. The priest disappeared silently into the night, the darkness of his coat overpowering the moonlight. In awe, Sojiro watched him leave.
なんか仙人みたいな人だな。
In his own way, Sojiro was expressing affection. For some reason, Father 80's distant tone made him feel nostalgic. Alice gave Sojiro a deathly stare.
気を許さないで。彼は教会の人間よ。私たちを監視する側だけど、今回は彼の手を借りるしかなかっただけ。許されるなら、真っ先に消えてほしい人間だから。
Her curse ringing in the air, Alice placed her hand on the doors to the chapel. They were twice her height and who knows how heavy. It did not look like she could open them anytime soon. Sojiro climbed the stairs 3 at a time and helped Alice push the towering doors inward. The dim light of the chapel brought with it the familiar scent of burning oil. The ecclesiastical interior was breathtaking. The tall ceiling, the stained glass windows on every wall, it all felt intended to illustrate the presence of the Holy Spirit within those chambers. Like the foyer in the Kuonji estate, there was not a single heater. The bitter cold made the chapel feel more severe.
あっちゃん、こっちよ。
The gentle voice echoed through the chapel, incongruous to its surroundings. It was the voice of a woman.
リツカさん、奥。
Alice made her way past the rows of pews toward the front altar. Sojiro closed the large doors and hurried after her.
早かったわね。これから迎えに行こうと思ったのに。
Is this another new character?
使える足があったから。後ろの彼。足って、あれ？あなた。
あ、
Sojiro showed himself surprising the woman. They stared intently at each other, wondering what the other was doing here.
知り合い？ああ、うん。まずいことに知り合い。宗十郎さん、引っ越したって話だけど、もしかしてあっちゃんのところに下宿してるの？
Sojiro nodded. Alice turned visibly sour at this unexpected development.
どういうこと？しずきくん、律香さんとはどういう関係？関係って、そうね。お魚屋さんでしょっちゅう割引してもらったり、荷物持ちを頼んでみたり、たまにお茶飲んだりする主婦の友みたいな。意味がわかりません。律香さん結婚していないでしょ。
Needless to say, Sojiro was also not a housewife's best friend and all that suggested, but there were more urgent matters at hand.
うわぁ、そこを突っ込むのか。あっちゃん、私にだけは一切妥協がないのはどうかと思うの。律香さんの場合、どこまで本気かわからないから。おかしなところは全部追求しておかないといけないだけよ。
あら素敵。仲のいい姉妹みたいね、私たち。じゃあその信頼に応えて本当のこと言うと、彼とは町内会の顔見知りよ。スパイ行為とかそういうんじゃないし、そもそもそんな器用な人じゃないでしょ、宗十郎さんは。
本当？
What's with that face? Alice stared straight at Sojiro to let him know she was mad at him for hiding this from her.
本当だ。魚屋でバイトしてる時に知り合った人だ。前に親切にしてもらったんで、お礼にイワシを1匹サービスしたら、それ以来ごひいきに。
そうそう。商店街で買い物してれば嫌でも宗十郎さんとは顔見知りになるわ。あっちゃんも怒るぐらいなら買い物に来ればいいのに。密かな商店街のアイドルです、彼。
アイドルとは人気者という意味で、値切りやすいかもって意味じゃないような。
His apparent popularity would have to be questioned another time. Collecting herself, Alice focused on the door in the recesses of the church.
律香さんの事情は知りませんが、彼は青子の連れです。その他に説明はいりますか？
ああ、やっぱりそういうことなのね。ま、言いたいことはいろいろあるけど、今はそれどころじゃないし。了解したわ。他ならぬあっちゃんの頼みだし、特殊な例だけど、彼はこちらで保護しましょう。
Alice nodded and began walking to the door.
アリス。
ダメよ、宗十郎さん。
As Sojiro was about to follow Alice, Ritsuka stepped in his way.
あなたは行ってはいけません。彼女たちに任せなさい。
She asserted bluntly. Meanwhile, Alice had reached the door and entered further into the chapel.
言ってはいけないって。どうして？
あなたのためよ。青子の容体は普通の人が見ていいものじゃない。気分を悪くするだけ。それとも嫌な思いをしてもいいくらい青子が心配なのかしら。
Sojiro was not able to give an immediate answer, and it finally hit him just now how bad a state Aoko must be in. Based on Alice's condition when he found her, he intuited that Aoko's injuries might be even worse. He tried to imagine her expression in that state, but could not.
青崎相手に心配なんかしません。
Literally, he had never been worried about her before, not truly.
でも会いに行くのね。
はい。
He answered her reflexively. Ritsuka sighed at the boy's naivete, but nonetheless stepped aside.
どうぞ行ってらっしゃい。アリスさんが使ったドアから入って4番目の部屋よ。今一番取り込んでる頃だから、ゆいちゃんの邪魔だけはしないように。
Sojiro thanked her and went after Alice, leaving Ritsuka Suze, the self-proclaimed everybody's friendly neighbor, alone.
さて、ゆいかあたりなら止めるんでしょうけど、ま、私は宗十郎さんの味方だし、傷つく男の子とか大好物だし。
Why did she use the term broken?
少々スパルタと自覚しておりますが、これも親切な姉心と思って、宗十郎さんには後悔していただきましょう。
A lot of the women like to toy with him, apparently. She spoke with force, but her words echoed aimlessly around the chapel. With a sigh, she shrugged her shoulders and made the sign of the cross in a rather impious manner. The sounds of Sojiro's footsteps grew fainter. His lack of hesitation had left a pain in her heart, and not because he did not look back at her, but because he was choosing to ignore the primal fear inside him. An elderly man once said, "An animal's death and a human's are two different things. You may think they are the same, but they differ to their core. Our heads have known the difference since the dawn of man. An animal's corpse, be it a pig or a deer's, is different. If the swing of an axe or a machete is violent, then so must a human corpse be. Therefore, before you see one with your own eyes, you should at least understand it with your ears. Listen closely, Sojiro. When a person dies, blood flows like a crimson river. It's too much to bear. Perhaps because he was not used to the stone path beneath his feet, Sojiro's mind wandered back to the words he'd heard as a child. The instant he opened the door, there was a palpable change in the air. The room was small, with only a simple bed and a small wooden dresser. And there in the bed was lying on her side Aoko? Tending to her was the woman he'd just seen in the chapel, Ritsuka. No, she only looked a lot like her. Her eyes were closed and her garments covered in blood. He had met her maybe once before. Yuika Suze, a nun at the church. The sister? She was doing something to Aoko. Yuika held a pair of scissors and some thread. Her hands moved delicately yet quickly, as though playing an organ. Her movements were precise, as if flawlessly reading sheet music. One by one, the supply of bandages diminished. Bandages recently applied to the wounds were quickly replaced with fresh ones. Gauze was placed everywhere to try and cope with the amount of blood. Once white cloth was now dyed red and discarded. The dressing scattered around the floor resembled roses. In a wilted rose garden, the nun played her organ. The scene looked unlike any reality Sojiro knew. It was clear why the air had changed. There was a savage odor in the room. Even though he was experiencing it for the first time, he knew what it was. The smell burned his lungs. He could not bring himself to look at the bed. Fighting his feelings, his eyes refused to move there. He noticed Alice next to the bed. Her expressionless, ever expressionless, she looked like a statue next to a grave. Except she was trembling ever so slightly. It could have been from fear, anxiety, rage, or a combination of the three. Before her lay a life on the verge of death. But whose life? It was difficult to tell with only a glance. Some sort of puppet covered in bandages, perhaps. Her hair should be beautiful, but it fell flat, disheveled. Despite her short breaths, her chest convulsed. Up, down, up, down. Facious though the thought was, Sojiro recalled the rodeo machine on the roof of the department store. Ah. The painkillers and the anesthesia could not have been working. New bandages were soaked crimson in seconds. Her fingernails bit into the sheets. Her face twisted in agony. Anesthesia would not be enough, so if she was still alive, she must be conscious too. It worried him that no one seemed concerned about this. In this state, she would surely lose her mind before her life. In short, the boy never wanted to see anything like this ever again. Bedsheets should be white, not red. With every blink, the color deepened. Sojiro was finally forced to accept that the bleeding mess in the center of it was her. He felt the blood surge in his veins. The squeaking of the bed. The snip of the scissors. The gasps of agony. It all faded. All he could hear was his own pounding heartbeat. The smell of the blood she choked up sent a wave of nausea through him. His knees abandoned him. And it was perfectly understandable. His brain had to shut his consciousness off to protect itself. The mind can only take so much reality. He would give anything to never see something like that again.
そうか。青子ちゃんは全部わかっているんだね。自分だけのことじゃなくて、この後に起きることも、何が残って何が残らないのかも、全部まっすぐに受け止めている。それでも自分であり続けられるということは、とても強いことなんだよ。
And on she went. I kinda liked her smile, but she just had to go and say the one thing I wish she hadn't. The last day of middle school seemed so long ago. As the ephemeral cherry blossom petals danced around, my little dream was crushed. I'd never really considered myself strong. At least until I began remembering those words from time to time.
青崎は分かってると思ってた。いや、きっと分かってるんだな。だから、そこが強いんだろうね。
And lately, an idiot who said things like that had appeared in my life. I knew I always judged people more harshly than those around me, but to have someone I'd only known for a few days point that out was like a stab in the chest. Not only that, the words sounded so similar, they made me so angry I couldn't see straight. Only him and one other person have ever said anything like that to me. Then again, I suppose my sister said the same without actually saying it. You're different from us. But me being me, I took it as a curse rather than a compliment. My actions, my choices, my morals, all the good and bad I've done, when all's said and done, am I really any better than everyone else? Of course I am. I'll never sacrifice myself for those around me. They just had to call me strong, true to myself, in spite of how alone, stubborn, and ridiculous I know I can be. When I was younger, it only confused me. I mean, I don't know any other way. I am who I am. The frustrating fact is, I simply don't have the courage to give up. So why? Why do I get treated special for doing what comes naturally? The sunlight stirred her. Maybe it was the pain from having her whole body held together by arcane threads. But Aoko felt like she had a silly dream. She gulped air through her painful, parched throat. Gray rays of light shone through a small window, bringing her back to reality. Unable to bear it, Aoko attempted to roll over. Except she could only move her right arm. She tried lifting her arm, but couldn't feel anything past her elbow. Once she stopped concentrating on her bandaged arm, it fell to the bed like a stone. Aoko took in her surroundings, moving only her eyes. Evidently, she had been asleep in this bed. Unable to feel certain parts of her body, she felt like a robot. The room was tiny and undecorated. It was like an apartment without a tenant. Judging by the good repair, she guessed that she was in Ida Church. Outside, it seemed closer to noon than morning. Clouds filled the sky as usual, dulling the sun's rays. Idly, she thought that it could be enough to melt the snow outside. And then finally, she noticed the figure of a girl. Next to her bed, Alice Kuonji was sitting in a chair, unmoving.
Alice.
She called out to her all too casually. It was more difficult to talk than she thought. Alice was her typical stoic self, although Aoko did notice a glimpse of concern in her eyes.
寝てないんでしょ。肌が荒れてる。
努力はしたわ。けど、瞳子さんに飲まされたものが解毒されるまで眠れそうにないの。半端な痛みは、こういう時に生ぬるいわね。
Alice's uncharacteristically vulgar comment helped Aoko feel a little more like her usual self. She felt reassured having a comrade in arms by her side instead of a concerned neighbor.
そう、アリスもやられたの。状況は大体予想してるけど、一応細部を聞かせてくれない？
Aoko remained horizontal as she spoke with a cool tone. Despite Aoko's condition, Alice granted her request. After all, they had known each other for 2 years. Alice knew exactly the kind of anesthesia Aoko Aozaki needed right now. Alice Kuonji's battle with Toko Aozaki ended in the former's victory. The Thames Troll was a special familiar even among fairy tale monsters. While lacking the incredible reality warping abilities of a flat snark, its sheer mass, durability, and strength were second to none. Toko's ruined magecraft was rendered completely ineffective by its stolen armor. In all fairness to Toko, most mages would not stand a chance against the bridge giant. The reason lay in the mystic's body. Alright guys, I'm gonna end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. When we come back, we'll be continuing on in this new chapter.